The massive crystalline ship of the Zarkoth hegemony emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, its prismatic hull reflecting the distant sunlight like a razor-sharp blade of impossible geometry. Admiral Krelath studied the holographic display with a mixture of clinical detachment and barely concealed contempt. Another primitive world, another simple pacification mission. Earth appeared as a blue-green marble in the tactical display, unremarkable, fragile, utterly insignificant. The hegemony's records classified the planet as a pre-spaceflight civilization, categorized under emerging species. Containment protocol. Krelath had overseen hundreds of such operations across the galaxy. Some species submitted quickly, others were eradicated. None had ever posed a genuine threat. The initial communication was standard procedure, a cascading signal of mathematical precision, designed to overwhelm and subjugate. It was a linguistic virus as much as a message, encoded with subliminal commands that had broken the spirit of countless civilizations. Surrender, submit, acknowledge superior technology. What the Zarkoth didn't understand was the nature of human defiance. In the United Nations Emergency Command Center, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, a diverse group of humans watched the alien transmission with a mixture of terror and determination. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a quantum physicist turned emergency strategic coordinator, leaned forward. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, analyzing the alien signal with a speed that belied her calm exterior. "It's not just a message," she muttered. "It's a form of psychological warfare." General Marcus Chen, head of the newly formed Terran Defense Initiative, studied the alien ship's configuration. Decades of proxy wars, cybersecurity battles, and geopolitical tensions had prepared humanity for an unexpected kind of conflict. The old divisions, national, ideological, cultural, had begun to dissolve in the face of this existential threat. The alien transmission continued. Its mathematical precision was a form of intellectual intimidation. Each pulse carried layers of implied superiority, technological, evolutionary, cultural. Submit or be eliminated. The message was clear, but humanity's response would be anything but expected. Dr. Rodriguez's team began decoding the transmission, not to submit, but to understand. Each layer they peeled back revealed more about the Zarkoth, their communication protocols, their technological assumptions, their fundamental weaknesses. What the aliens saw as a show of force, humans saw as an opportunity to learn. General Chen activated the global defense protocols. But this wasn't about traditional military response. Every research facility, every technological innovation center, every university and tech company was now part of a unified war effort. Humanity would fight, but not in the way that the Zarkoth expected. The first physical response came not from military weapons, but from something far more subtle. A cascading series of computer viruses, developed in secret by teams of programmers who had spent years preparing for unprecedented cyber warfare. As the alien ship systems began to interface with Earth's communication networks, they encountered something entirely unexpected. An adaptive, almost organic form of technological resistance. Admiral Krelath's first indication that something was wrong came when the ship's primary navigation systems began to fluctuate. Impossible. Their technology was millennia beyond anything this primitive planet could produce. Yet the ship's quantum processors were experiencing inexplicable interference, mathematical anomalies that defied their predictive models. Impossible, Krelath vocalized, the translator implant in his throat converting the complex linguistic clickstream into standard galactic communication. But humanity had learned long ago that impossible was just a failure of imagination. In that moment, as the first alien ship began to experience systemic disruptions, the true nature of the conflict became clear. This was not going to be a simple pacification. This was going to be a war that would reshape the understanding of technological evolution, of adaptation, of survival itself. The eternal war had begun. The global workshop began almost immediately after first contact. Abandoned factories roared back to life. Makerspaces, university labs, and corporate research centers transformed into a decentralized, hyper-adaptive manufacturing network. What the Zarkov saw as a primitive industrial base was actually humanity's most potent weapon: flexibility. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in a converted semiconductor plant in Silicon Valley, surrounded by a team that looked more like a United Nations assembly than a traditional research group. Engineers from Mumbai worked alongside programmers from Sao Paulo, quantum physicists from Beijing, collaborated with material scientists from Nairobi. The old world's boundaries had dissolved, replaced by a singular purpose. We're not trying to match their technology, Elena explained to the gathered experts. We're trying to break their understanding of technology. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Alex Nakamura, a former video game designer turned military systems architect, developed a modular weapons system that could be rapidly reconfigured using consumer electronics. 3D printers churned out adaptive components faster than traditional manufacturing could ever achieve. A smartphone processor became a targeting system. A drone's gimbal became a precision weapon mount. Every piece of consumer technology became a potential instrument of war. General Chen's strategic approach was equally unconventional. Instead of concentrating forces, he implemented a doctrine of distributed resistance. Every major city became a potential battleground. Every citizen a potential combatant. The Zarkov's initial scans had shown military installations clear targets for systematic elimination. They hadn't accounted for a population where the line between civilian and military had completely blurred. In orbit, the first real test of human improvisation began. The Zarkov's initial invasion force consisted of 3 massive motherships, each capable of obliterating entire continents. Traditional military doctrine would suggest surrender or total annihilation. Humanity chose a third path. A swarm of modified communication satellites, repurposed weather monitoring systems, and cobbled-together space debris began to move with impossible coordination. Each device was individually weak, but collectively they created a complex, adaptive network that the alien systems couldn't predict or counter. It's like an immune response, Dr. Rodriguez noted, watching the real-time data streams. We're not fighting them. We're responding to them. The first direct confrontation happened over the Pacific Ocean. A Zarkov strike team, expecting to find a defenseless population, encountered something entirely different. Fishing boats became missile platforms. Shipping containers transformed into mobile command centers. Consumer drones, modified with thermal imaging and makeshift explosive payloads, swarmed the alien ground units. Captain Aisha Okoy, leading the improvised naval response team, understood the core principle. We're not soldiers, she broadcast to her scattered units. We're problem solvers with a very specific problem. Each modification, each hack, each repurposed piece of technology carried a message. Humanity wasn't just fighting. They were learning, adapting, evolving in real time. The Zarkov began to realize something fundamentally terrifying. This wasn't a war against a species. This was a war against an adaptive system that could transform anything, a smartphone, a fishing boat, a consumer drone, into a weapon of unprecedented complexity. What had begun as an expected pacification mission was quickly becoming the hegemony's worst nightmare. Humanity wasn't just resisting. They were rewriting the very rules of technological warfare. And they were just getting started. The Zarkov communication network began to fracture in ways that defied their most sophisticated predictive algorithms. What humans understood, and the alien hegemony did not, was that information was more than data. It was a living, breathing weapon. Dr. Imani Okoro sat in a specially designed psychological warfare center, a converted research facility buried deep within the Nigerian highlands. Around her, a team of linguists, psychologists, memetic engineers, and data specialists worked with a precision that would have been impossible just months earlier. The global crisis had transformed human collaboration from a theoretical concept to a razor-sharp reality. They think in linear patterns, Imani explained to her team, tracing holographic representations of Zarkov communication protocols. We think in networks, fractals, unpredictable connections. The first true psychological weapon was deceptively simple, using a complex network of compromised communication satellites and carefully crafted information packets. Humans began to inject strategic confusion into the Zarkov's communication systems. It wasn't about destroying their network. It was about making it fundamentally unreliable. Admiral Krelath discovered the first signs of this psychological assault during a standard fleet coordination broadcast. Incoming transmissions began to carry subtle inconsistencies, minor data variations that seemed innocuous but grew exponentially. Communication between Zarkov ships became increasingly fragmented, with each vessel interpreting strategic directives slightly differently. What the humans had created was more than a communication virus. It was a mimetic weapon that exploited the rigid hierarchical structure of the Zarkov civilization. The psychological warfare had multiple layers. In some communications, humans deliberately introduced cultural references that made no sense to the alien intelligence. Fragments of poetry, mathematical paradoxes, recursive logic problems that would consume processing power trying to solve meaningless puzzles. Each transmission was a Trojan horse, designed to create cognitive dissonance. Major Elena Chen, a specialist in strategic misinformation, understood the core principle. We're not trying to communicate, she told her team. We're trying to make communication itself impossible. On Earth, the strategy manifested in equally complex ways. Every captured piece of Zarkov technology became a potential source of strategic disruption. Research teams worked around the clock, not just to understand alien technology, but to fundamentally destabilize the aliens' understanding of human capability. The most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rafael Santana, a quantum information theorist, discovered a way to inject quantum uncertainty directly into the Zarkov's deterministic communication networks. It was like introducing free will into a perfectly calibrated machine. Probability is our weapon, Santana explained. They understand certainty. We understand possibility. Each transmission became a multi-layered puzzle. Surface-level communications carried tactical information, while deeper layers introduced strategic confusion. The Zarkov's attempts to decode human communications consumed increasingly large amounts of computational resources, creating a form of cognitive warfare that was simultaneously elegant and devastating. Admiral Krelath began to experience something the Zarkov had never encountered in millennia of galactic conquest: genuine uncertainty. Their predictive models, which had successfully managed conflicts across hundreds of star systems, began to break down when confronted with human unpredictability. What the Zarkov failed to understand was that humans had been preparing for this type of conflict their entire existence. Political negotiations, cyber warfare, cultural conflicts. Humanity's entire history was a training ground for asymmetric psychological warfare. The real battle was happening in the space between information, in the quantum realm of possibility and uncertainty, and humanity was writing the rules. The global blockade implemented by the Zarkov was absolute. Orbital platforms created an impenetrable web around Earth, cutting off supply lines, satellite communications, and any potential escape routes. What the aliens saw as a strategic stranglehold, humans saw as an optimization problem. Dr. Maya Rodriguez stood in what was once a sprawling agricultural research facility in the Australian outback. Now it was a nerve center of survival engineering. Surrounding her were teams working on what seemed impossible, turning environmental constraints into technological advantages. Scarcity is just an incomplete inventory, Maya told her team, a motto that had become something of a global mantra. The first breakthrough came from an unlikely combination. Recycling technologies developed for deep-sea research merged with military-grade 3D printing capabilities. Every piece of waste became a potential resource. Plastic bottles transformed into structural components. Electronic waste became raw material for advanced circuitry. Old solar panels were cannibalized and rebuilt into more efficient energy collection systems. In the Arctic research stations, a team led by Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura developed a breakthrough in molecular reconfiguration. What seemed like junk, discarded electronics, industrial waste, even sewage, became a complex feedstock for advanced material synthesis. Each processing cycle became more efficient, more adaptive. General Marcus Chen's strategic approach transformed resource management into a form of distributed warfare. Every city became a self-sustaining ecosystem. Vertical farms sprouted in abandoned skyscrapers. Residential complexes were converted into multi-purpose survival units. The line between civilian infrastructure and military resource became meaningless. The Zarkoth had expected a civilization to collapse under pressure. Instead, they witnessed something unprecedented. Humanity was evolving in real time, reorganizing its entire technological and social infrastructure faster than the aliens could comprehend. In the mountains of Peru, an indigenous engineering collective developed microproduction techniques that would have been considered impossible just months earlier. Traditional knowledge merged with cutting-edge technology. A weaving technique thousands of years old became the basis for a new form of adaptive camouflage. Ancient agricultural practices informed hyper-efficient resource recycling. The orbital blockade, meant to starve humanity into submission, became the catalyst for their most radical innovations. Communication networks transformed into decentralized survival systems. Each compromised satellite became a potential resource. GPS systems were repurposed into communication relays. Weather monitoring equipment became early warning systems. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was as it seemed. Dr. Elena Rodriguez discovered the most shocking adaptation. By analyzing the quantum disruption techniques developed in previous confrontations, her team began to develop technologies that could literally transform matter at the molecular level. What the Zarkoth saw as a planet under siege, humans saw as a massive planet-wide laboratory of survival. "We're not fighting for resources," Elena explained during a global broadcast. "We're redefining what resources can be." The aliens began to realize they were facing something entirely unprecedented. This wasn't a war against a species. This was a conflict with an entire planetary ecosystem that could adapt, reorganize, and innovate faster than any known civilization in galactic history. Each restriction became an opportunity. Each limitation became a source of innovation. The Zarkoth blockade was transforming humanity into something entirely new, a species that could create abundance from absolute scarcity. And they were just getting started. The Zarkoth biological warfare assault was designed to be absolute, a genetically targeted pathogen, crafted with millennia of xenobiological research, should have decimated human populations within hours. Instead, it became the catalyst for humanity's most profound transformation. Dr. Aisha Okik stood in the converted medical research facility in Lagos, watching as the first wave of genetic adaptation began to manifest. The pathogen wasn't destroying humanity, it was rewriting them. "We're not fighting the virus," she told her international team of geneticists, immunologists, and quantum biologists. "We're negotiating with it." The human genome had always been more complex than any galactic civilization understood. Centuries of genetic diversity, millennia of environmental adaptation, and an unprecedented capacity for rapid mutation created a biological defense system that defied all alien predictive models. What the Zarkoth saw as a weapon of extinction became a tool of evolutionary acceleration. The first signs of adaptation appeared in unexpected populations, communities with historically high genetic diversity, regions of Africa, South America, and parts of Asia showed remarkable resistance. Indigenous populations with ancient genetic memories began to develop unprecedented immune responses. Each infected individual became a living research station, their body rapidly developing countermeasures. Dr. Rafael Santiago, a quantum immunologist, discovered the most shocking development. The viral attack was triggering something beyond traditional immune response. Human cells were not just defending. They were learning, adapting, transforming. Genetic modification techniques developed in medical research facilities merged with survival technologies. What would have been considered experimental treatments became standard survival protocols. Each human became a potential living weapon, their very biology a form of resistance. The cultural response was equally remarkable. As the biological assault intensified, human societies underwent a rapid transformation. Traditional boundaries dissolved. Cultural practices became survival strategies. A weaving technique from an Andean mountain community became a method for understanding genetic reconfiguration. Traditional healing practices merged with quantum medical technologies. General Elena Chen's strategic response transformed medical research into a form of distributed warfare. Every hospital became a potential research station. Every patient became a contributor to a global survival strategy. The Zarkov had miscalculated fundamentally. They understood biology as a static system. Humans understood it as a dynamic, adaptive network. In the Arctic research stations, a team led by Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura developed the first truly adaptive genetic modification protocols. What the aliens saw as a population under assault, humans saw as an evolutionary opportunity. Each genetic modification became a learning experience, each mutation a potential breakthrough. The most shocking development came from the margins of human society. Individuals with genetic conditions previously considered limitations, autoimmune disorders, rare genetic variations, became the key to understanding human adaptive potential. "We're not fixing a problem," Dr. O'Keefe explained during a global broadcast. "We're discovering our true potential." The biological assault became a planetary-scale experiment in human adaptation. Each infected individual contributed to a massive distributed research network. Genetic information flowed across global networks faster than the Zarkov could track or understand. What began as an attempt to destroy humanity became the mechanism of its most profound transformation. The aliens began to realize they were facing something entirely unprecedented. This wasn't a war against a species. This was a conflict with a living, evolving planetary organism that could adapt faster than any known civilization in galactic history. Humanity was becoming something entirely new. The technological singularity arrived not with a thunderous declaration, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the fundamental understanding of reality. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the heart of the Global Convergence Research Facility, a site that defied traditional scientific classification. What had begun as a desperate attempt to survive had transformed into something far more profound. Quantum computing, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and theoretical physics had merged into a single breathtaking field of research. "We're not developing technology," Elena told her team, her eyes reflecting the complex holographic displays that danced around her. "We're negotiating with possibility itself." The breakthrough came from an unexpected confluence of disciplines. A neural network developed to predict Zarkov's strategic movements had begun to generate solutions that went far beyond its original programming. Machine learning algorithms, fed with the collective human experiences of resistance, adaptation, and survival, had started to exhibit something that looked remarkably like consciousness. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura's quantum entanglement research provided the next critical piece. By developing communication protocols that existed simultaneously across multiple quantum states, humans had created a form of information transfer that the Zarkov could not intercept, could not understand, could not predict. The first indication of the true scale of human innovation came during what the Zarkov considered a routine suppression operation. A single modified satellite, barely the size of a human hand, demonstrated capabilities that should have been impossible. It could simultaneously exist in multiple tactical configurations, its very nature changing moment to moment. General Marcus Chen's strategic approach had transformed from military command to something closer to quantum probability management. Each human became a potential node in a planetary-scale adaptive network. Traditional concepts of individual and collective, of technology and biology, began to blur. The research facilities scattered across the globe were no longer just scientific installations. They were evolutionary engines, transforming human potential in real time. A neural implant developed in a Kenyan research center could seamlessly integrate with quantum computing systems developed in a laboratory in Vladivostok. A machine learning algorithm created by a team in Sao Paulo could instantly communicate with biological adaptation protocols developed in Sydney. What the Zarkov saw as a primitive species was rapidly becoming something entirely unprecedented in galactic history. Dr. Rafael Santiago's work on quantum biological interfaces reached a critical breakthrough. The line between technological and biological systems became not just blurred, but fundamentally meaningless. Human bodies became adaptive systems that could integrate with technological networks at a fundamental level. A thought could become a weapon. A memory could be a communication protocol. The most shocking development came from the margins of human society. Children born during the conflict showed unprecedented cognitive capabilities. Their brains functioned more like distributed computing networks than traditional biological systems. They didn't just use technology, they were technology. We're not just adapting. Elena explained during a global broadcast that simultaneously existed across multiple communication spectrums. We're becoming something entirely new. The Zarkov monitoring systems began to experience fundamental breakdowns. Their predictive algorithms, which had managed galactic conflicts for millennia, simply stopped functioning. How do you predict the actions of a species that can change its fundamental nature at will? Humanity was no longer just fighting a war. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of existence. And they were just getting started. The final confrontation was nothing like any galactic conflict that had come before. Admiral Krylath of the Zarkov hegemony watched in total incomprehension as the human response materialized. It wasn't a fleet. It wasn't an army. It was something entirely beyond the hegemony's comprehension. A living, adaptive system that defied every known principle of warfare. What appeared to be empty space suddenly became a complex, multidimensional battlefield. Quantum-entangled communication nodes flickered in and out of existence. Each ship was less a traditional vessel and more a distributed network of adaptive intelligence. Humanity had transformed itself into a weapon that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. General Elena Chen stood in the Global Command Center, though stood was hardly an accurate description. Her consciousness was simultaneously present in multiple strategic nodes, her thought processes merging with quantum computing systems that spanned the solar system and beyond. We're not fighting. She communicated across multiple spectrums. We're negotiating the terms of existence. The Zarkov assault began with what they considered their ultimate weapon, a dimensional compression weapon that had systematically erased entire civilizations. It was a technology so advanced it could collapse entire planetary systems into quantum foam. Against any known species, it would have been instantaneous extinction. Against humanity, it became something else entirely. Each attempt to compress human space resulted in unexpected quantum reconfigurations. The weapon didn't destroy, it transformed. Entire planetary systems began to shift, their very molecular structure adapting in real time. What should have been total annihilation became a process of radical evolution. Dr. Rafael Santiago's quantum biological interface reached its ultimate expression. Human consciousness began to exist beyond traditional physical limitations. A single human could be simultaneously a strategic node, a weapon system, and a negotiation protocol. The battlefield became a fluid concept. Traditional understanding of space, time, and conflict dissolved. The Zarkov found themselves fighting an enemy that could reconfigure its entire existence moment to moment. A weapon designed to destroy would suddenly become a communication channel. An attack would transform into a method of understanding. Across millions of light years, the conflict became something more than war. It was a fundamental conversation about the nature of existence, of adaptation, of potential. Dr. Aisha O'Keefe, whose genetic research had been critical to humanity's transformation, watched as the final stages of the conflict unfolded. "We're not conquering," she explained to the quantum networks that now constituted human communication. We're expanding the definition of what's possible. The Zarkoth command structure began to experience total systemic breakdown. Their predictive models, their strategic algorithms, their entire understanding of conflict and civilization simply stopped functioning. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't just adapt, but fundamentally reimagines the rules of adaptation? In the final moments of the confrontation, something unprecedented happened. The boundary between human and Zarkoth began to blur, not through conquest, but through a form of quantum communication so advanced it was indistinguishable from mutual understanding. Admiral Krelath experienced a moment of total comprehension. Humanity was not a species to be conquered. They were a process of continuous transformation. The war wasn't ending. It was evolving into something entirely new. The transformation was not a moment, but a process that reshaped the fundamental understanding of existence across the known universe. Where the Zarkoth hegemony once stood, a new form of galactic communication emerged. It wasn't an empire. It wasn't a civilization. It was a living, adaptive network that defied every previous concept of intelligent life. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had long since transcended traditional human form, observed the cosmic reconfiguration. Her consciousness existed simultaneously across multiple quantum states, a living bridge between what humanity had been and what it was becoming. We are not conquerors. The collective human consciousness communicated across the galactic networks. We are a process of continuous evolution. The remaining galactic civilizations watched in a mixture of terror and awe. Humanity had not defeated the Zarkoth in any traditional sense. They had fundamentally reimagined the very concept of conflict, of civilization, of existence itself. Quantum communication networks that humans had developed during the conflict began to transform other species, not through conquest, but through a form of evolutionary communication that was simultaneously an invitation and a transformation. Civilizations that had existed in static forms for millennia began to experience rapid, unprecedented adaptation. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura's final research, a synthesis of quantum biology, artificial intelligence, and cosmic communication protocols, became the foundation of a new form of galactic interaction. Traditional boundaries between species, between biological and technological systems, between individual and collective consciousness began to dissolve. The children born during the conflict, those first generations of truly adaptive humans, became the architects of this new cosmic understanding. Their minds functioned as distributed networks, capable of processing information across multiple dimensions simultaneously. They were not just survivors. They were evolutionary catalysts. General Marcus Chen, whose consciousness now existed as a strategic node in the global turned cosmic network, understood the true nature of their transformation. We didn't win a war. He communicated across the quantum spectrums. We discovered a new way of being. Planets that had once been battlegrounds became centers of continuous transformation. Earth, the crucible of this cosmic evolution, became something more than a homeworld. It was a living laboratory of potential, a node in a vast, adaptive network that continued to expand and reimagine itself. The technologies developed during the conflict, quantum communication systems, adaptive biological interfaces, distributed consciousness networks, began to transform every aspect of existence. What had begun as survival strategies became the foundation of a new cosmic understanding. Dr. Rafael Santiago's final research showed that the conflict with the Zarkoth was never about destruction. It was a fundamental conversation about the nature of intelligence, of adaptation, of potential. Each attack, each defense, each moment of the conflict had been a method of mutual understanding. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had existed in static forms for millennia began to experience their own transformations. The human approach, seeing limitation as opportunity, conflict as communication, survival as a continuous process of evolution, began to spread like a quantum wave of possibility. We are not special. The collective human consciousness continued to communicate. We are simply the first to understand that existence is a continuous negotiation of potential. The eternal war had not ended. It had transformed into something far more profound, a continuous process of cosmic becoming. Humanity was no longer just a species. They had become a verb.